Welcome back to Stand Up Your Tubes, where we control the tubes and the tubes do not control us. So I cranked out this hat this morning, and I wanted it to have a fur brim, but I wanted it also to be easy, where our fur is on the outside, where it's one tube and we aren't taking our tube off of the machine and trying to turn it around, because we all know when we're working with the fuzzy yarn, the fur yarn, that the fur goes to the inside of the tube. I did not want to have my purl side out, and I thought of a way to do that that is quick and easy, and I can't wait to tell you about it. So I've already made one, which is unusual. I usually just make a prototype and then film the beginning after I have my creature or product made. But the yarn that I used, so I went to Hobby Lobby, and this is Yarn B Tender Touch Snow. It's $3.49, and I was able to make that beanie with 135 yards in here, so it's a pretty small size, but I have a substantial amount left even after making the Pom Pom and using this and my fur yarn to make that Pom Pom. The other one, and I have this much left, not too much, and I started with a new skein, and it's the Yarn Bee for the moment. Try to find, and it is white. It says cream, but this is white, and it looked really good with this yarn. I bought it at the same time, holding them together, knowing that they would look nice together, and I have this much left. So I have two more skeins that I'm going to start with to make this beautiful beanie. I took it over to Margaret's house, and it was well loved over there. Let me tell you why I think it's so special. Because the fur is on the inside, it's on the outside. So when you put this out over your head, you feel that beautiful fur on your forehead and cheeks, and it's just so warm. In Texas, this last week, it's gone down to 27. That's pretty cold for us. So I thought I'd go ahead and crank out a beanie, because I know there's a lot of people out there that are up north that are having snow and ice and would appreciate something this beautiful and this warm to wear. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start our tube. And something else I wanted to mention was, even though this is $3.49 and the fur yarn is $6.49, every other week at Hobby Lobby it goes 30% off. Didn't even use the whole skein, so $3.49. That's a really, really inexpensive beanie, and we don't need a full skein of the fur yarn either. So it makes it a really reasonably priced cap to make. I have my largest Pom Pom maker out because that's going to come into play at the end when we decide to put the Pom Pom on, and I already know I want a Pom Pom. So I'm going to cast on. Since I've already made my first white one, I already know that this yarn, I had great hopes for it being really, really, really easy to work with, and it's not, probably because it's furry. And not furry in that sense of the word, but I got that fuzzy texture to it. So I'm going to put this down and start cranking, and I'm going to do 50 rows. You saw my hat at the beginning. If you'd like yours to be a little bit longer, you can add some rows. Remember, if you wanted to add 5 rows, then you'd really need 10 rows, because we're still going to turn it like a beanie. We're just doing it different than anything you've probably seen before. So I'm going to have to go around kind of slowly until I get 50 rows. I'm going to make them both the same. And watching for tucked stitches, and a tucked stitch is when the yarn does not fall down over the pin. You'll see it hanging up in the air, and I didn't see that happening until I got to about the 4th row. So I was very optimistic that this was just going to go through like butter, and it did for about the first 4 rows. So I'll come back in a couple rows and tell you how I'm going to handle this yarn to make it easier to work with. But let me get to the part where it's causing a little bit of a problem. I wanted to jump back on just for a minute to say that Because this is the second hat that I'm making, this just a little bit. This morning when I got up, it was 27 degrees out, and I'm in my RV. I had the space heater running. It was about in the low 50s in here. I was wrapped up in my robe. I was so cold. I had on flannel pants, and I was having a problem with my yarn. I made the entire hat, and it turned out so cute. And while I was over at Margaret's house, it started warming up. I came back in. It was pretty warm in here, so I turned off the space heater, opened the door to cool it off a little bit in here. It got a little too warm. I'm not having any trouble with this yarn at all. It is just, had I just done this video, I would have said this yarn was a dream. So I really do think it has a lot to do with the temperature and the heat that you're running. And of course, when you're running a space heater, it's going to make it a really, really dry heat. But let me tell you what I did on the first beanie. I cranked it out, just being careful, and it wasn't terrible. If I saw a yarn that didn't fall down over my pin, I just took a minute to push it down to make sure I wasn't getting a tucked stitch. When I got about 20 rows on, I reached underneath, found my yarn tail, and pulled it until I'd closed the beanie up. And it takes about 20 rows to get there. And even if it's like a flat plate on top, as long as you can get it closed up enough, then I put my soft weights in there, and I dropped 3 of them in. These are the glass, I guess gems. They're 99 cents a bag. Very, very cheap. This is some river rocks in an ankle sock. I dropped them in, and boy, does that make a difference. Then I have no tucked or dropped stitches. But because I've opened my door and it's a little cooler in here and the space heater's not running, I don't think I'm going to have to do anything except crank this out and say that it's going beautifully. So I'm going to crank to 50 rows and I'll join you back. All right, I have completed my 50th row, and what a difference a couple hours makes. I didn't have any problems cranking this out. Had I not made the video this morning, I would have said this yarn was fabulous. So it definitely has something to do with the temperature, what kind of heat we may or may not be using. So now I am going to tie on my fur yarn. We've finished 50 rows. I'm going to slide it through here to make sure it's going through my, let me back it up just a little bit this way, so that it's sliding through. Whether you have a Sentro or an Addi, you want it to be sliding through here and not binding up. I'm going to put it under this pin and make sure that it gets trapped. Make sure this pin traps it, the next pin traps it. And I never have ever had a problem with my fur yarn. I love it. It's just really so nice to work with. So now that I have my tails back here where I can see them, I'm going to tie them together. Put a knot here, snugging it up pretty snug. Let it drop to the inside, and I have that secured now. I'm going to crank around until I have finished 30 rows, and that's going to put us at 80 rows. I'm not going to have any trouble with the fur yarn. You're not going to have any trouble with your fur yarn. So I'm going to crank it out, and I'll join you back when I'm finishing up my 80th row. I'm on row 54, and I just wanted to show you that I just let this fur yarn just drape through my fingers like this. I'm not putting a lot of tension on it, but I'm just, holding it gently and letting it go through. And it's just so much fun to work with. I love working with the fur yarn. It's so forgiving. It cranks out so good on my 22 pin, my 46 pin, my 48 pin. It just doesn't matter. So as you can see, it's all going to the inside, to the purl side where I don't want it. And I just came up where they tied the two ends together. So I'm going to trim it off just a little bit right here. And I'll show you how I'm going to handle that without cutting it. I'm going to pull it up out of my yarn feeder and make sure it's going under the pins. It's going to take it under right here. It's going to just be nicely hidden right in the fur. And now it can come right back in. I'm going to pull it just a little bit to make sure it's sliding easily through there. Bring it back and keep on going. So that's how I handled it where it was spliced. It won't be completely unnoticeable. So I'm going to keep going till I get my 80 rows, and I'll join you back, and we will be finishing up this beanie with just a little bit of whip stitching. So I will be right back. I've made it to row 80, and because I don't have my table with the hole in it, I just rolled my beanie up. So I'm under my white pin right before the black pin. I'm going to cut the fur yarn off and leave it a couple inches long. Make sure it goes under this last white pin and it's trapped. I'm going to then bring my 4-ply back on because we want to cast off with our 4-ply, not with our fur yarn. So make sure that the 4-ply is getting trapped underneath the black pin. Bring it around. Make sure that we're going from fur yarn to this yarn, so watch it and make sure it's going under your pins and getting trapped. Now I'm back around here, and I can tie these together, my 2 yarn ends, snug them up, give them a good tug. Okay, let them fall down in. I'm going to go around 1 time. So I'll have completed my 81st row with my 4-ply. Trap it with the last white pin. And now let's get us a nice yarn tail. I know you can't see it, but long enough that we can cast off. And then we're going to just take it off 1 pin at a time because the way we're going to put this beanie together, we don't want to be snugging this up. So sometimes when I have my yarn tail, if I'm being frugal, I'll do kind of a short yarn tail. And when I get like from here to here, I'll start snugging it up and like cinching my beanie shut while I'm casting off. Well, we don't want to do that this time at all. So make sure that your yarn tails where you tied your 4-ply and your fur together stay down and don't get tangled up with this yarn here. So we're going to come around a couple rows, make sure we're staying out of that yarn, maybe even put your fingers on top of those 2 yarn tails until you get a couple stitches away from it. We're picking it up off of our machine 1 at a time, and we're just snugging it up without putting too much tension so that when we pull this off, it's at least as wide as our Addi. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be snugging it where you're taking the width of the beanie away. So I'm going to just keep going around until I'm back to my last pin. Just like this. Just gently pulling it through. Going for another couple stitches. Being gentle until I'm done. And I'm back at my black pin, and then I'll join you back and tell you what we're going to do next. I'm at my last stitch, and I'm ready to take it off and stretch it out. Let me get rid of my Addi because we're at the finishing touches. And here we are. Here's our tube off the machine. It comes off just like this. I still have my needle on the yarn I cast off with so we can stretch it out. We want this to stay really, really loose and open because we're putting this together different than anything I've seen. I'm not saying that nobody's ever thought of this before, but I haven't seen a video on it. And I never want to copy someone else's idea knowingly. Okay, so here we go. And the fur is on the wrong side of the tube. So by shortening this yarn tail down just a little bit, I could keep it separate from the one that I cast on or cast off with, because this one's a little bit longer, these are shorter, so that's how I keep track. Okay, So now we want to see the right side of our tube. So we're going to fold this over, fold it down, and bring it, let's do it from the right side though. Let's flip it out so we see our fur. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, so now we're on the side that has the beautiful fur, and this is our pearl side. Here's our yarn tails. I'm going to just shorten this down just a little bit. We're going to tuck them right up inside when we fold this down. Okay, so now when we fold this down, we're going to be bringing out the good side of our tube to meet the good side of our fur. So now we have our knit side out. The pearl side is getting buried inside here. This yarn tail is not long enough for me to sew with because we're not going to pull this shut like it's a beanie. And truthfully, it's too hard to cast off with a piece of yarn that's 3 feet long. It just wants to get tangled up. So right here where I tied these together, I want to bring my yarn tails together so that I know that I'm going straight. And I have a nice piece of yarn right here, nice and long. I'm going to start with a new piece of yarn. Flip it over because I'm left-handed. I want to be sewing with my left hand going away from me. So here's my yarn tails where I tied my fur to my 4-ply. Here's my yarn tail from casting off. I'm going to leave those just absolutely loose. Bring these together, and I'm going to put my needle right in where the fur yarn meets my 4-ply. Pull it through and leave a yarn tail to tie off to when I get all the way around. So I'm going to have some yarn tails here. And I'm going to come up right under the double loop on my beanie. So where you cast off, if you look, you'll see double loops like this, so that we're getting under something more substantial than what you would is the yarn that we would be pulling if we were cinching this up. We don't want to just get under that. We want to get under our stitch, which is the little double loop that you'll see. So just going to start my first stitch here with my yarn tail to tie off to later. Down here, long enough to tie off to. It doesn't have to be, you know, really, really long. And I'm just folding this up. Going to go right, I mean, you really do need to keep this right where you're switching from your 4-ply to your yarn to get a nice look going into the next loop. It's very forgiving, telling you. Find my next loop. Okay, so now we don't want to be getting our brim twisted, so I'm going to show you how I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to get my bobby pin and maybe go, you know, like over to here. I'm not going to be doing it every two inches, but I'm going to just find my row underneath here. So this row, and I'm just going to follow it out with my finger, keeping it right in the track, bringing it up to the top. I have it marked, bringing it up to my fur, and just putting the pin in here. All that's going to do is keep me from twisting this, where I'm pulling it too tight, and it's keeping my row lined up, going under and coming up to the top. And then when I'm sewing this, I'm not tightening it up. I'm gently pulling my yarn through. I'm going under two bars up here, and then going under my double loop down here. It doesn't have to be perfect. When it comes up to the fur, it just kind of disappears. Okay, so now back down into my beanie, roll this up, find my double loop that's right below it. I keep my fingers in between it so I'm not sewing it to the bottom side. Back in here, right where it changes from 4-ply to yarn to fur. Find my double loop. It is so forgiving. I'm serious, really forgiving. I'm going to get to my pin, flip it over, line my row up again, you know, like maybe 4 inches away until I get back around where I started, and I will join you back when I get there. So here's what happened to me. As I was sewing around, I didn't have my yarn quite long enough. So I had this little yarn tail. That was my last stitch going this direction because I'm left-handed. Here's my cast on yarn, still just hanging here. So I'm going to just turn it around and sew towards my yarn tail. This is the one I was sewing with. I'm going to tuck this inside. Those are where I tied on the 4-ply to my yarn, to my fur yarn. So I'm just going to turn it around and just come back the other direction until I meet that little tail there. And then I'm going to tie it together and bury my yarn ends going down this way. And this is pretty short, but I'll just put my needle almost all the way in, put this little tail through and pull it down. And it was pretty quick going around. I wish I was timing it. So I'm going to come back and I'll tell you how we're going to finish the top of the beanie and get our beautiful brim on. Thread up some yarn and we're going to close up the top of the beanie. If you've done this before, you already know what we're going to do. We're just going to go under a row, over a row, which is loops, 2 loops, 2 loops, 2 loops. If you've never done it before, let me zoom in just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Like this. And we want to leave a yarn tail that we can pull with to close up the top. So I'm going to leave a yarn tail here. And then this is my next row, a loop, a loop. I'm going to go over it and then go under the loop, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. See how it goes? So easy. That's how we're going to close it up. Over, under, all the way around. And when I get back to here, to right here, we'll close up the top of this beanie. All right, we're getting close to being done. So pull your yarn tails until you've cinched up the top of this beanie. Put 2 or 3 knots in here. If you need to, with your needle, take a couple little loops up here to close up the hole. But we are going to have a really big fur pom-pom on there, so it's not that bad. And just tie it. Make sure you've got several knots in here till you're feeling secure. And we're going to flip this inside out and let those yarn tails stay on the inside for now. And this is the top of our beanie. And now here we have our yarn tails right here hanging on the end here. We're going to fold this up. Get a nice long piece of yarn because I learned my lesson that it's going to take a pretty long piece to get it all the way around. So I'm going to cut this one a little bit longer than I did my first one. Thread up my needle. And we're just kind of doing a repeat of what we did when we folded our 4-ply down to our fur. We're bringing our fur up at this time. So here's my yarn tails. I want to make sure those go in. You can't see your rows now. So we're going to just do it by feel, that we're not skewing it or stretching it, that we're coming straight up with it. So once again, you're going to go right in to your cap where the 4-ply and the fur yarn meet. Leave yourself a yarn tail to tie off with. Then when you come into your cap, because we cast off with 4-ply, there's a little double loop here of the 4-ply. That's what we're sewing into. So I'm going to come back in right where my fur switches to the 4-ply, come back up and grab this double loop right here. Pulling it snug, but not changing the circumference of this beanie. So let me do one more with you, and then I'm going to go off camera and go around. So folding it up, just bring it up and folding it, go for the next double loop until you make it all the way around. When I'm all the way around, I'll come back on. Okay, I sewed all the way around, made it back to my starting point. I'm going to go ahead and take my needle off for now. I have all my yarn tails here, so I'm going to just tie off to them and secure all these ends. Do a double knot here and grab these two yarn tails here. They're just different yarn tails we had, but that's going to secure everything. Nothing will come undone now. Then I'm going to bury these right down into the fur, but you can see that we're getting there. So now all we need is a pom-pom. This is the fastest little hat to make. It's beautiful on both sides, but I'm calling this the outside because it's the nicer look, I think, because this is where we folded our 4-ply yarn down, and you can see a little bit of loops in here, but you don't see that on this side. So keep this as the right side of your beanie, and we'll make our pom-pom, put it on, and call this hat number 2. We're on the home stretch. I have my largest pom-pom maker. Mine happens to be yellow. If you've never made a pom-pom, they're going to have a lot of good videos that you can go search. But the way I'm making my pom-pom to look like this one is I'm taking a 4-ply, this 4-ply, and my fur, and I'm going to wrap it around together, holding it right onto the side of my pom-pom maker. And I'm going to wrap it 40 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I think you get the idea. When I get wrapped 40 times, I'll just snip it off, come over here, wrap this side. Yeah, I have this side with 40, and I'm just going to do the same thing on this side with my double yarn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I know you don't want to hear me count it, so that's 11. I'll be right back when I come to 40. This is where it gets messy. So now I have 40 of the double yarn, my fur and my fuzzy 4-ply. And I'm going to snip this up just like any other one. And because it's fur yarn, you know that fur is going to fly. Snipping it all the way open on both sides. Making sure I get all of it cut. This is where my allergies will start acting up because there is going to be a lot of fur flying here. When I finally shake this pom-pom out, I'm going to go outside to do it. Okay, so there I have it released all the way around. We have yet to even start making a mess. So now I want to tie this with my 4-ply. Bringing it through and up. On my first beanie, I actually pulled on the yarn that went into making this just to make sure it was secure and it wasn't going to just pull out. Because sometimes if you use a real soft yarn and you make a pom-pom and then you pull on the little strands, they'll just want to slip right out because it's such a slippery yarn. So I'm really making this snug, really as tight as I can get it. Bringing it up to the other side, tying it again. Coming up to the original side, trying to get it just as tight as I can possibly get it knotted onto that pin in there. Okay, holding my yarn tails, opening this up, letting you experience with me the yarn that's about to start flying. There we go. Open up this side. And pull it apart. It's going to be like having a rabbit in here with us. There we go. It's flying. But we get a really nice pom-pom. So what I suggest you do is go outside at this point, fluff this up, take your sharp scissors with you, snip it around till you get a nice round ball, and make less mess inside. So that's what I'm going to do, and I will be back when I have my pom-pom shook out. I'm seeing sunspots. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe that's just the glare of my light. This is the most beautiful pom-pom, and literally when I went outside and I snipped it around, then I just kept going like this on it until all of the fur came off like this, because a lot of it will come off. I mean, this is fur, so expect a mess. Now we're going to take the top of our beanie, thread up our little yarn tail, and we want to go in on each side of where we cinched it. We don't want to go through the same place with each yarn tail because we want this to hold really well. So bring your needle through to the other side, pull that yarn tail through, get your second yarn tail, and go on the other side of your beanie hole. So this one went through right here. I'll put this one through on this side. Bring it through to the other side. And here are my yarn ends. Let's pull that snug. Tie a couple knots. 2. Tie it to our yarn tails that snugged up the top of our hat. And we can bury these yarn tails. Let's shorten it down. I'll just weave them right up in between the 2 layers of this beanie. And we have a second beautiful beanie to go with our first one. I was able to make 2 of them this morning in no time at all. Aren't they cute? I love them. I love that the fur is also on the inside. That's going to be up against your face when it's so cold outside. And these just remind me of little white Arctic foxes. I would say they look like polar bears, but then if there were a polar bear, we would put some red on them to make them look like the Coca-Cola polar bears. And I want to keep these just pure white. So thank you for watching the tutorial. It's so quick, so easy to do this, to get the fur onto the right side, which is the dilemma, isn't it, when we're working with the fur yarn and it goes to the purl side. So we fixed that with 1 tube. We didn't have to take the tube off, turn it around, try to get it back on our Addi or our Sentro. It's really not easy to do that. So we conquered the problem. So I hope that you will like, subscribe. If you want a taller one, or you want it to flop over and have the pom-pom on a flop, add some rows. Like if you want it to come to here, just count on here. How many rows does it take to come down 3 more inches? Well, just double that up because you're going to be folding it under. So if you say, wow, I wish it was 10 rows longer, well, do your 10 rows, but add 10 more rows on because that'll go to the inside, and then you'll have a hat where it kind of falls over like this, and you have a floppy pom-pom on it. But that's not the look that I wanted, and this is the look that I got, and they're beautiful. So I hope that you'll make yourself a beautiful hat, and I don't even want to call it a beanie because I think it's too beautiful to just be a beanie. All right, God bless you, and thank you for watching.